There we go. Okay, so again, our questions came with us in the chat. Yeah, what enrollment issues are you aware of at your child's school? Which students are impacted? And how does this shape your thinking about enrollment and program balancing? Forgot to share my screen. There we go. So here are the numbers that Jed just went through as well. So how does what you see personally at your school shape your thinking?
Hello, I go to CSS, and mine seems average. I can't do the snap math. Seems like you're either 6 or 7 or somewhere in the teens. You know, our data is what it is. You've all looked at it. There's our direct certification. There's our enrollment. We're minus 27 students. I would say that I don't know how much that affects us because that's 3 kids per grade. So I feel like we're, it's completely average position. So I guess I'll stop talking. I will say real quick as a data analyst that the colors represent some sort of tiering. And so that's tricky because it implies good and bad. And I don't know if that's the point of this. Like all of a sudden there's a scorecard and I'd hate to get hung up on this stuff, but like, should people feel bad because they're in red or good because they're in green? I don't know what the point of that is, but it's just something to look out for as people address their own schools that we've, again, like sort of Josh was saying, we've created a scorecard of sorts here. So let's just all proceed with caution as we talk about that. One more quick reminder for those of us that are colorblind that it's hard to discern between these particular colors.
Thank you, that's helpful.
I was going to say for Creston, so some of the enrollment issues that we've been struggling with for years is our catchment rate is a little bit lower. We are a neighborhood school. We're surrounded by a lot of focused option schools, and so that pulls away from the neighborhood. And recently, I think the direct certification, our numbers are lower, which doesn't necessarily represent accurately, I think, represent the student population because PPS is giving free lunch and breakfast to all students now, and so they didn't have to sign up for that. So I think those numbers are slightly skewed this year from what they might be if that plan was a little different. And we appreciate it. Don't get me wrong. That's awesome. So.
I'd like to share, this is Alyssa, Woodstock parent, that when I look at these numbers, I feel like they're not very reliably from just reliable, excuse me, from just a pure kind of scientific standpoint, because we're judging what happened during a global pandemic, like an unprecedented event that we just went through. And so when I look at when I just think about the people that I know that left our school, you know, some left because they went to private school because their kids could go to school much sooner than PPS started in-person classes. Some people lost their jobs in the pandemic and left. And so I guess I feel like I don't quite trust these numbers to make decisions going forward for all of us, because it just seems like, I think a much more interesting data set would be like what happened in 2018 and 2019 before all of our lives were upended in every imaginable way by the pandemic. So I don't mean to be a naysayer. I guess I just am not quite sure how to really use this in a meaningful way to help guide me.
Sorry.
I was gonna piggyback on Alyssa because we're both from Woodstock. It's funny, I was almost wasn't even looking at the difference between preliminary and forecast, and kind of had the same sentiment as Alyssa about not trusting the numbers. One of the things that struck me was Woodstock's numbers are pretty high compared to other elementary schools, like second to only to Richmond in total population. But then I was thinking, what does that mean? And I think there are a couple of numbers are missing, which is like what percentage of capacity is the school, and also average classroom size. So I think those are probably the two that I would be most interested in, and I would think would be the most important to look at when trying to figure out what we're trying to do here.
Yeah, I like that a lot, Eddie. I feel like I want more context to this because I feel like having these numbers, because I believe that PPS sort of asked for this data to be brought to this meeting, that leads me to believe that there must be some way in which PPS staff are considering using this data to help guide some of our work. And I could be totally wrong about that, and I'm not trying to lay fingers. I'm just trying to kind of understand the thought process behind why we're looking at this. And so I think having context of adding, capacity, where are we at within that? And then also, looking at sort of catchment percentages as well. So are we seeing for schools, do they have a small catchment area, but they're like grabbing almost everybody, and they have a pretty stable population? Then that makes me think, oh, we might want to shift those boundaries a little bit because that's a school that people are going to. Or are we looking at a school that, is in a different scenario? So I feel like I want to add in those 2 or 3 parameters in with this chart, and that would give me more to look at this with.
Hi, it's Marissa, Harrison Park parent. So our principal at a meeting for parents of kids in the DLI program has said that unfortunately our Chinese DLI program numbers are way down this year because Chinese families have disproportionately chosen to keep their kids at home, and then they're forced to unenroll from the DLI program. So we're hoping that's temporary, and at least native speakers can get back in the DLI program, even having missed some of it. So we definitely expect that to recover. So I don't know if that's been the case at Woodstock too, but I definitely hope, I appreciated hearing from Judy that that we can try not to consider this aberration in the data from the pandemic. So.
Tanya Arnold, I'm the principal at Mount Tabor, and I have kiddos at both Glencoe and Mount Tabor. I'm really curious about the numbers of students from each one of these schools that are attending the virtual academy as well. And what happens in the future, is that going to be an ongoing option that PPS is going to offer for students and families? And if not, are they coming back to their neighborhood schools? I just am really curious about what the impact is on the enrollment on all of the schools provided there, and how many of our students exercise that option, are still in the district, but in that virtual online option.
Tanya, I just put the same question in the chat.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing. And I another piece, data is always so interesting. You can go other ways with it, as Kathy Murray, principal at Marysville. But I was thinking, when we looked at, Jed alluded a little bit to, it looked like maybe some of the areas with lesser percentage of direct certification, those schools had a more significant of non-returning students. So it made me wonder about the ease of signing up for the online academy. Was that somehow navigated more easily by certain populations than others? And I would love to see at each school how many of those students that haven't returned were actually in the online academy too. I think that would help look better at what we'll be at next year.
So are there enrollment issues that you are aware of that maybe are not reflected in this chart?
I'm wondering about enrollment because I'm very grateful the district has sort of held everything, hasn't changed any programs this year that we know on based on like less students returning if they're choosing online options or waiting until it feels safer to return in person. But I think the real concern that would be is if our numbers, drop significantly in one area, you're not able to, staff fully to have as many sections or as many offerings. And since funding is always per student, that's going to impact. Is even for Title I schools, it impacts the per student funding that comes in.
Can I just say that Marnie designating me as note taker in this device, like the idea was that everyone would get a few minutes of training and y'all would be putting your own stickies in there. And I like for me to not respond to every one of these questions and hold you all here for the next 5 hours so we can suss through all of it is just like, it's not painful. It's joyful learning for me. So I would love to dig into every one of these questions with you. Please keep them coming. And no, we are not planning to use this in any particular way. It's just the fact that we see today. And when you go into the dashboard and you look for things like the capture rates and the catchment and all of that, you're going to be seeing numbers that are a little bit different than this. And so we just thought it'd help to just get it out there right now and talk about it. Okay, I'm done.
Thank you, Judy. And I would put out there too, like I'm cautious about saying this because I know that in the past, talking about different programs housed within a single school has at times brought some divisiveness to the conversation. So I want to be really thoughtful about that. And I'm also curious knowing that like we have families who are in and have chosen different programs. So I'm wondering if it'd be helpful to see this data, but disaggregate it a little bit. So seeing where if we do have a special focus program or a DLI program, are we seeing different outcomes and different movement for those families?
Mm-hmm.
Is your name Sheila?
Yes, thank you.
Sheila. So are you noticing that? How about your experience? Are you seeing that happening?
Not in my daughter's class. So, but that's very, very small. It's a very, very small sample. So she's enrolled in an immersion class and her class is very stable. I think we have one student who moved away during the pandemic.
Anybody else? What are you aware of? What are you hearing? What are you seeing?
I think one of the big questions that I have in my mind is that now that we have transitioned almost all of Southeast schools from K-8s to K-5s, we have a much lower enrollment number for a lot of these schools. And PPS is committed to, as this shifts, we will try and keep as much resource as we can for each of the schools. However, at some point, that is going to start evaporating. And as someone mentioned, it's based on numbers. And so I think that's part of this balance is that we have to figure out, do we have too many schools? And I hate to say that, but do we have the right number of schools? Do we have them in the right locations? That's going to be a big part and a big impact to a lot of different communities. And we also have to factor in, if we keep the schools at the same level right now, those schools may not have those resources that they need to really be successful. So that's a big question, I think, from a lot of the people that I've talked to.
I might want to add just one kind of word of caution, maybe, because part of the reason I kind of brought up like class size. So I mentioned this to a couple of people. I was a classroom teacher for 20 years, and most of it in Portland Public, but a few years in another district. And I remember, I don't know how I got involved in this, but one of the district decisions to where to allocate the number of students, and I remember they were overstuffed one year, and they purposely put a lot of students in certain schools. I mean, class sizes, middle school class sizes were like over 30 students, crazy. But they're like, oh, I had one class that was 40 middle schoolers. But I remember them saying, oh yeah, we purposely put more in these class schools because we know the kids here are well behaved and they can handle it. And like I remember when my kids started in Woodstock, being kind of surprised at how stuffed the classrooms is. And one of the stereotypes with Asian Americans is that, oh yeah, we're all good students and we'll be well behaved, and so it's okay to stuff them in a lot. So I'm not saying that's actually what happened. I'm just saying, like, you might want to pay attention to like this image, like if you're gonna put a lot of kids in, if it's not equitable and you have some schools with huge class sizes, where is it going to be, and is that equitable, or is there bias involved in making that decision? So I just want to throw that out there as like, maybe something to pay attention to.
Yeah, I agree with you, Eddie. I mean, I know like all the parents I know at Harrison Park are like, we think it is a huge advantage. It's like this best kept secret that we have smaller classes here. And we're like, this is wonderful. This is a huge advantage. But, and why are like my concern about how many schools we had to feed into Kellogg at the end of phase one is like, do parents really want their kids going to such an overcrowded school? Is that actually what you want? I mean, why wouldn't we want to balance the enrollment better? But
I ask a question as it relates to that. Would you guys say that, I'm sorry, I'm not a facilitator, so I shouldn't ask any questions.
No, please.
Like, Eddie, to your point, are some of these reductions in percentage can be looked at as a good thing because they like level out some of these schools to like a manageable, are some of these enrollments, I don't know. So I'm asking, like, are there some of these schools overstuffed? And you could say, oh, we're down 6%. Thank goodness. Now we're at like a manageable level or whatever. We don't really have that information here. Hey, and real quick, what Elisa, I believe her name was saying, like, how can you possibly guarantee that these people will come back?
Sure, there's a lot of teachers that are like, oh, I'm so glad I've here.
Right, down 20%, thank God. Now I can actually teach. So it's interesting. This data, whoever said, why are we looking at this, is an astute person. There's got to be a reason. It'd be nice to know the reason.
We have just about 30 seconds left to get to that. Would somebody like to volunteer to share out what they heard in the big room? Anybody else? Putting their finger on their nose? Would anybody like to share out on behalf of your Willamette group?
I mean, I'm inherently a vocal person,
Great.
but I don't want to. It
would be great if you would.
I don't want to if no one wants me to.
We do. Thank you.
All right, I'll try my best. I'm sorry, everybody.
And it's here. I'll be sharing my screen, so you'll be able to see it.
Okay,
We have 10 seconds.
right. I'll try my hardest to give everybody a voice. Everybody, I'm sorry. Apologize in advance. I love you all.